figure out how I can make sure I see Dr. Hendon. There she is. All right. Dr. Reeds. Kevin Reeds there. Man, it's so nice to see your face.
Oh, I'm excited to hear what you have to say.
Well,
Congratulations.
thank you so much. Thank you for your work and for allowing me to build on it.
My pleasure. Thank you very much.
Dr. Heidi Ventura is my advisor, and Dr. Kathy Hendon is my reader there, so you can make that connection.
Dr. Reed, it's so nice to have you. Thank you for joining Michael. I'm sure he's very excited.
I am.
Oh, I appreciate the opportunity. I appreciate the invitation. Thank you, guys.
Well, Michael, you let me know if you think we're ready to start. Do you have most of your guests here?
I think most who can join this afternoon are already on. So, and I do need to, I don't know if you guys know much about this, but I am gonna try to hit this record button, and I believe we're rolling. So anytime you all are ready, I believe I can give it a go.
Okay, well, let's go ahead and get started then. I always like to remind you that from the beginning of time, God has initiated this particular day and appointed it for you for this defense. He knew this when you were born, and it is a great day that maybe you have only known about or hoped for the last 2 years, but something that God has known from the very beginning. So it's very exciting to be here together with this group to celebrate with you and hear about the work that you've done. So let's start with a little bit of prayer. Father God, we're so grateful that you orchestrate every step of our lives. We thank you for Michael, for the heart that you have given him for generosity, for Trevecca, and for other organizations who seek to connect people who want to do good work in your name, with those who are able to do it hands-on in various ways. I pray that you would be with him in this time, that you would calm him and give him clarity and your spirit as he's moving through and just sharing with us the excitement of what he's done and what he's found and what it means for the future. Bless him in this moment and the days to come. In Jesus' name, amen.
Amen. Well, thank you very much, Dr. Ventura and Dr. Hendon and others who have joined here today. The journey here and what I have learned along the way, I would have to say that among the most essential things I've learned in this journey would be that one has to let the research take one where it will. Research reveals the what, where, and how of a given construct or study. For me, I would never have gotten to the what, where, and how without a compelling why. Generosity and encouragement have been modeled for me by many key persons in my life. But pairing a study of generosity with satisfaction with life and commitment to the organization was a revelation brought on by the need to produce a dissertation study. One mentor in particular, Dr. Stan Toller, helped spur me to action, although he passed away before I could tell him. His legacy was a significant motivator throughout this journey. I'm having just a brief hiccup here with the technology. Stand by. Let's move on now to the research questions. The first research question was, what was the relationship between generosity and satisfaction with life? Second research question, what was the relationship between satisfaction with life and commitment to the organization? And a third and final research question is, what was the relationship between commitment to the organization and generosity? In order to answer these questions, a review of the literature was obviously necessary, and it all began with generosity. First of all, I'd like to talk a little bit about the term generosity, since it was foundational to the entire study. The Latin term generosus is where we get our word generosity. It grew from a sense of nobility of birth into a nobility of purpose. However, my favorite definition, and the one to which I attached for the purposes of this study, came from the Science of Generosity Initiative at the University of Notre Dame. Their simple definition of generosity is giving freely and abundantly to others. So generosity lay at the heart of the entire reason that I even took on the doctoral journey. And it was my good fortune to come upon the work of Dr. Kevin Reeds from 2014, who developed a philanthropic profile of alumni donors that was based on a previous study done by Smits in 2012. Dr. Reeds kindly allowed me to take his work and to work it into this particular study that paired itself with two other existing instruments, constructs developed by a team of researchers, first beginning with life satisfaction, or a study of well-being. It was significantly impacted by the work of Ed Diner, Robert Emmons, Randy Larson, and Sharon Griffin at the University of Illinois in 1985. Their research produced the Satisfaction with Life scale that has helped shape research in this construct from that time until the present. Commitment to the organization was developed in large part over a course of many years, but refined into the organizational commitment scale, which was the third leg of this research triangle that I undertook. Danny Balfour and Barton Wexler in 1996 created the organizational commitment scale, which offers researchers the ability to broaden their studies. And such was the case for my study of commitment to the organization or institution, particularly of Trevecca Nazarene University. There are many more highlights from the literature review that expanded my understanding of these constructs that have impacted me in a great way, but we'll have to save some of those for another time. In fact, we may come back to a couple of them at the end of the presentation. The methodology for the research study was put together as follows. Consideration was given early on to studying several institutions. However, given the unique nature of my work at the University of Trevecca and on my own journey as a researcher, the decision was made to focus on donors at Trevecca. You can see the data points there that make up the study. Over 2,200 emails were sent to donors to Trevecca from the last 5 years. That would be financial years 2014 through 2019. Those emails produced 223 persons who actually opened up the link to the survey. And of those 223, 173 persons ultimately completed the survey. The data were analyzed from Pearson R correlation tests and multiple regressions, and additionally 2 open-ended questions in the survey, again owing credit to Dr. Reeds. 2 open-ended questions in the survey afforded us a qualitative approach to study answers that respondents offered in their own words. I used SurveyMonkey to deliver the electronic survey that combined the 3 different instruments I had mentioned in the literature review. The generosity donor engagement profile based on Reed's 2014 study, the satisfaction with life scale by Diner's team, and then the organizational commitment scale created by Balfour and Wexler. And now moving on to what we found out as a result of the research and the survey itself. First of all, for research question 1, was there a relationship between generosity and satisfaction with life? The generosity scale, derived from Reed's donor engagement profile, was based on 3 factors: alignment of mission and fundraising, quality of academics, and relationships. And while I did not include written hypotheses within these research questions, I must admit that I had at least one going into the process. I was convinced that generous people are more satisfied with their lives, and I expected the results from the numbers would prove that. Indeed, respondents to the survey did indicate a high degree of satisfaction with their lives, but not necessarily because they were being generous with their money. And now that leads us into research question. Excuse me, I should mention before we move on that there was no indication of statistical significance that their generosity led directly to their satisfaction with life. And this was true for both the correlational and multiple regression tests that were run for this question. Research question 2, was there a relationship between satisfaction with life and commitment to the organization? It is important here to more fully explain what is implied by identification, affiliation, and exchange. Satisfaction with life is a series of 5 questions that respondents were asked to comment on by virtue of a Likert type scale. In fact, the satisfaction with life scale and the organizational commitment scale are based on Likert style answers to specific sets of questions. With satisfaction with life, it's basically just how are you feeling today? And the respondents would mark accordingly. With the organizational commitment scale, Balfour and Wexler divided their 9 questions into 3 groups of 3. That's where we get the identification, affiliation, and exchange. Identification commitment is seen in terms of membership in an organization that is valued and respected by the public, that makes important contributions to the public good, and that it is capable and effective. Affiliation comes from a sense that the organization to which one is attached cares about the individual and their well-being, and also from a feeling of belonging to a close-knit group, almost like a family. And this does fit well at this university, as we often refer to the Trevecca family. Exchange is based more on a sort of contractual, if I do this for you, I can expect this from you. This is why it's crucial for organizations to show appreciation to its members and never take them for granted. Exchange is shown to be the weakest of these 3 organizational attachments, not just in my study, but in others as well, historically speaking. Now, research question 3 is not the next slide. A couple of more statements that I need to make from research question 2. Identification revealed neither a relationship nor statistical significance. Affiliation and exchange each demonstrated a weak, according to the Pearson-R correlation scale, but significant relationship, with affiliation being the slightly stronger of the 2. Research question 3, findings. I would say that this was really interesting to me, because when you ask the question, was there a relationship between commitment to the organization and generosity, and you have 3 factors in each of the 2 constructs, it brought forth quite an array of results, because you're running 3 sets of 3 against 3 sets of 3. So that brought forth 9 different Pearson-R results. So there you see the OCS factors, identification, affiliation, and exchange, were run with the 3 generosity factors: alignment of mission and fundraising, quality of academics, and relationships. There was a weak but significant relationship for identification with both alignment of mission and fundraising, and quality of academics as well, but not for relationships, which showed neither a relationship nor significance, which I would say was a bit of a surprise. Similar results were also found for affiliation with alignment of mission and academics, but not for relationships. Finally, the Pearson R tests for exchange with the 3 generosity factors showed that only quality of academics produced a level of significance. It was a weak relationship, but did show statistical significance nonetheless. So neither alignment of mission and fundraising nor relationships found a correlational relationship or statistical significance. Multiple regression tests were also conducted to determine what, if any, significance existed when comparing the 3 factors within the construct of generosity with the 3 factors within the construct of commitment to the organization. So the results of this regression revealed statistical significance, interestingly, in all 3 factors for commitment to the organization, with affiliation showing the strongest of the 3. So moving on to general discussion, one of the real surprises that was really, I guess, I wouldn't say shocking, but fascinating would be a better word, was that in the results of the survey, that the relationship between generosity and satisfaction with life really ended up showing no great correlation. And so if there's any implications one may draw from this study, it might be that donor commitment is more to an ideal, a sense of philosophical affiliation. At least in the case of Trevecca donors, it's clear that their attachment is not about some sort of contractual exchange, but rather to the type of institution that Trevecca is and what it represents. I would also like to comment that one of the most fascinating studies that I came across is one done by Park et al. I think I'll get to that in just a moment. I should also offer another comment about the donor engagement profile that was assisted by the study from Dr. Reed's, produced from the survey, will give the university a treasure trove of data about its donors. Also alluding to an earlier mention about the literature and how it impacted me, one of the things that really struck me is that generosity is clearly impacted by the culture in which one finds themselves. So depending on the country or family of origin, the understanding of generosity and the actions one takes to be generous are clearly impacted by the culture. Let me get now to this Park survey, or study, I should say. It dealt with neural responses in the brain when one simply thought about doing something for another person. It created a positive reaction in the brain, almost like the Beach Boys' Good Vibrations. And interestingly, when you think about the 3 constructs that my study undertook, this particular study concluded that the crossover activity within the brain regions linked commitment-induced generosity with happiness. It's the only study that I found that really tied all 3 of the research constructs together. And I wanted to make sure that I mentioned that here in the presentation. So what about professional implications? In the current climate of uncertainty brought on by the COVID-19 pandemic, colleges and universities are facing unprecedented questions. News of some who have already made the decision to simply close their doors for good, or those who are pondering when or if they can reopen, is sobering. Knowledge of why donors have contributed in the past is also a good predictor of why they would likely continue to make donations to the university. It would seem to be an obvious priority. So perhaps there may be a market for this type of study going forward. And that is one thing that this research actually surprised me with, that the work that has been done might have some ability to be translated to other institutions as well. In a sense, looking at one institution, one singular institution, one might wonder whether there's any generalizability there. But I think as the foundational study that I was able to work with from Dr. Reed's would indicate, that certain types of institutions do have certain similarities of culture and patterns. And so for Trevecca, if I were to make recommendations, I would say that the future leveraging of assets and resources should be done so with a strong eye toward what the donors have said to us in this survey. And then consideration for any future development or fundraising efforts should be given as well to the results of the study. As I move to a close and prepare for questions from Drs. Ventura and Hendon, I'd like to read from the closing paragraphs of my dissertation. When I opened up, I talked about the fact that there's a lot of what, where, and how involved in research, but for me, I needed a why. And I believe the final two paragraphs help sort of bookend what I was talking about at the opening. So, if nothing else, this is what I've learned over the last 27 months. While this study revealed much about the levels of life satisfaction and organizational commitment, both specifically within the research instruments and in the literature, the underlying and guiding theme of generosity is worth pursuing, especially in the face of a global pandemic. Generosity is not just an idea that has evolved over the last few millennia. It is a dynamic state of mind or emotion that is only validated by specific actions on the part of persons willing to do so. In spite of the fact that even the thought of doing some act of generosity brought about a positive neural response in human subjects, as mentioned with the Park study, it cannot simply be the thought that counts. Generosity requires action. It requires that one be satisfied enough to cross the threshold of commitment to give whatever generous donation one should choose to. In the course of this study, the researcher has become more keenly aware of previously innocuous or unseen acts of generosity in real time. It may be likened to the purchase of a new car for someone who now sees that model of car almost everywhere. The researcher is recommending that all persons, everywhere, and at all times possible, should look for ways to give to and care for one another. Generosity often comes from the most unexpected people at the most unexpected times, and the joy of giving can be seen in their faces. The old adage of give till it hurts has never been more irrelevant to this researcher. In fact, this researcher would recommend to everyone that they give till it feels good. And that's the conclusion of my presentation. I'll be open to questions now.
Wonderful presentation, Michael. Thank you so much. Dr. Hinton, do you have any questions for this presentation?
To unmute myself first. Michael, well done. This was a joy to journey with you through. I know that Dr. Ventura really has worked with you very, very closely on this, but I can remember from the very beginning when we met in the library one day, trying to really flesh out this concept for you, and all the times that Dr. Ventura met with you as well. It's really kind of come full circle, and it's been a real joy to read, and I well done on that. Can you just talk a little bit more about, can you back up a couple slides to your recommendations?
Yeah. The recommendation slide. Okay.
Yeah, talk to me about, when you talk about future leveraging of assets and resources, and while this can't be generalizable necessarily because it was just a singular institution, talk about, can you flesh that out a little bit more for me?
Well, I mean, I have opinions that have been formed about Trevecca because I've worked here for 30 years. So I can't just look at it in a vacuum based only on this moment, but the sort of lifetime of experiences that I've had there. One thing that led me to craft this sentence in the way that I did actually was informed in the late 90s and early 2000s when I was working in student development, where we undertook the student satisfaction inventory that Noel Levitz produced many years ago. I think they're Ruffalo Cody now. But every other year we would ask students to give us their commentary on their overall satisfaction with their experience as a student at Trevecca. And one of the selling points for Noel Levitz was to say, instead of trying to figure out in a meeting somewhere what really would make a difference in the lives of your students, why don't you ask the students? And so the students told us by way of reaction to this survey. So I had that in the back of my mind when I was working through particularly the donor engagement profile, as I'm calling it, the philanthropic profile that Dr. Reeds created. It is clear to me that, and I didn't have time to go into the full range of information that engagement profile shows to the university about what is most important to the donors. But in this new era that is still uncertain about how we'll go forward, I heard Dr. Boone talking even yesterday about we have about 3 or 4 different sets of plans depending on the way things go here over the next 2 to 3 months about how to reopen in the fall. If you have data and you need to raise money, we'll just take it to a full-on donor development mindset there. Our donors have told us what's most important to them about being affiliated with us. And so in the organizational commitment scale, finding that greatest strength of those 3 factors being affiliation, a sense of connectedness to a close-knit group, to the family, I believe that any decisions that we make about the future need to have at least some consideration for what donors who have given to us in the past are likely to ascribe meaning to in the future. So when I'm saying leveraging assets and resources, I think you have to look at how the university will orient itself from an administrative standpoint, not to be in bondage to donors, but to at least be informed by the donors about things that we ought to be able to affirm in ourselves so that they will stay involved with us in the ways that they have, and maybe even to a greater degree as God gives them the ability.
Yeah, thank you. I was just trying to determine, how this recommendation really connects to your research and what the research showed at the end of it.
Yeah.
Because you said it, and not in this presentation so much, but in your dissertation, you said, I think it was in the introduction, it's never become more clear that making data-driven decisions is so important than
Right.
just making anecdotal decisions.
Yeah.
So I just wanted to make sure that statement and that your recommendations really are driving and coming from the data that came out of your study.
To my knowledge, this is one of the few times that we've actually done a survey of our donors. We've done other surveys before, but at least in recent years, we've not had a study like this that gives us such good feedback. And the time constraints for this particular presentation, I guess, were geared more toward the research findings. But that's one of the beauties of this philanthropic profile or the donor engagement profile that we now have. Although that didn't completely tie to satisfaction with life and organizational commitment, there's a whole other set of data out there that this research will provide for us as an institution, and I believe is repeatable for other institutions of our type.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, I echo what Dr. Hendon said in how much I have learned about generosity. It's not a concept that I have really engaged with in the past, and so this has been a wonderful opportunity for me to learn something that's very important in administration in higher education. And so thank you for this learning opportunity that it's given me to be a better leader in an organization. A couple of the comments that I have are simply my excitement for what you've learned and different ways that I see, although these weren't the exact research questions that you were asking, there is so much here.
Right.
And so we're really trying to stick to what were the findings related to the research questions, but there are so many other things here, like the culture piece, and with the Church of the Nazarene being a global organization.
Right.
Future research in determining what that looks like culturally in generosity and commitment to organizations. The satisfaction with life scale. I know that there's an individual score that can be attached.
That's right.
And so one of the comments that you made in this presentation was that people weren't necessarily more satisfied with life. In the satisfaction with life, a literature that you've already looked at, was there a score that was typical, that was an average kind of score?
Well, it was a 1 to 7 Likert scale. You know, and the highest level of satisfaction was extremely satisfied, down to extremely dissatisfied. And so, you know, if a person was extremely dissatisfied, they would have a score maybe a 5 or 6. You know, if they were scoring ones versus a person extremely satisfied, the would be a 7. So the diner team attached a range of scores to talk about levels of satisfaction. This is just off the top of my head, but I think that about 67, 68%, maybe 70% of the respondents said that they were very satisfied or extremely satisfied. There was a real high degree of satisfaction. So it wasn't that respondents here aren't satisfied with their lives. That was one of the surprises of the research. It was that obviously they're generous because they're making donations to the university, but their satisfaction is not contingent upon their own generosity to the institution. They were generous to the institution for reasons we later discovered over on the organizational side. So does that answer the question you were asking?
It does.
Okay.
Yes.
All right.
I know that what we were looking for was a relationship between the two constructs, but then you could also, and that's what we have to focus on, but there's also the question of, were they actually more satisfied than the average person out there in previous studies?
Yes, I think it's clear to say that the respondents in this particular survey did rank on the higher end of satisfaction as composed with the overall, populace that has taken the test before.
Yeah. And then, of course, the follow-up question is how to increase organizational commitment. There is just so much there in reaching out with people and serving people who are engaged with us. And I know that is going to be such an important thing as you move forward as an expert in this area of generosity. Do you have any initial ideas of what you might want to do to learn more there?
My initial inclination is to lean into things that, we're doing fairly well on already. And I'm taking a page out of the Strengths Finder concept there, that you major on things that you're doing well as opposed to focusing on things that you don't do quite as well. But I do think there's an important distinction for us based on what we've learned from this study. The alignment of mission and fundraising and the affiliation, those two factors between the two constructs of generosity and organizational commitment, we need to take note of what these people have told us. And so back to Dr. Hendon's question about assets and resources, I think any institution that would find that sort of relationship, and there's room to build on this, because as we saw, even where there were statistical significance, those relationships tended to be toward the weaker end of the scale. So it's not that we don't have some room to grow there, but I think it's important that we find a way to look at those things that are already in place and make sure that those are as strong as they need to be, so that we can then maybe look in other directions. The interesting thing with me is that, again, for identification, those are more public sorts of recognitions, and I would have thought that identification would have been even stronger than it was. But it all came back to the sense of being a part of this close-knit group, and so moving forward, figuring out a way to make more people feel a part of that close-knit group would be really key for us, I think.
Good. Well, this was a great study, and you've done a wonderful presentation. Thank you so much. Dr. Hendon and I are going to jump off the call here and confer, and then we'll be back in touch with you in just for in a few minutes.
Just before you go, Dr. Ventura, I did want to say another personal word of thanks to you, with those that may still be listening. You helped me go somewhere I wasn't sure I could on my own, and you did it in a very unique way, and you let me find my way instead of telling me where to go. But you were always there, able to help, sort of keep me from going off the rails and getting frustrated and giving up and that sort of thing. And I owe you a great debt, and I wanted to be able to say that in front of the group. So
thank you. I really appreciate that. It's been wonderful to work with you and see you really emerge as a researcher.
Yeah,
That's
and
a great job.
I appreciate you and Dr. Hendon both so much. Am I supposed to end the Zoom meeting now? Is that protocol?
That would be fine.
Okay.
Dr. Hendon and I can jump off here if you want to talk for a few more minutes with your people, but then we'll call you in a couple of minutes.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay.
All right.